Today is March 14, 2005, and I am here at Mr. Volker's house. I am interviewing Don Volkers. He was born on February 25, 1920, and is currently living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The people attending are myself, Kayla Rugenstein, and Brenda Rugenstein, who will be videotaping. Mr. Volkers and I attend the same church, Millbrook Christian Reform. What type of work did you perform? Where did you serve, and during what war?
It was during the Second World War, and it was a construction battalion. We made airstrips, we built hospitals, we built aviation overhauls, which is like a factory that had about 40 large, 40 by 100 Quonset huts in it, that they could, instead of, an airplane has to have a motor changed every so many hours flying. And instead of sending it back to the United States, they could send it to where we were in the Hebrides at that time, and send it there, and much saved all that transportation. And we spent 9 months there. I first worked at building the dock, which is floating docks out of big pontoons. And I got injured then. I was in charge of one of the LCTs that was shoveling things to shore. I went up to the front and stepped down to tie up the boat, and I caught my leg in a big cotter key and ripped it open. So that was quite an experience, because the ship was 30 foot up where the rope was going up, and I knew it was bleeding enough that I had really better get it taken care of. And I don't know how I did, but I went hand over hand up that rope without using my legs, but hand over hand. I was stronger then, I don't know. And I don't know how I got over the top rail. Of course, I was tying the ship up, and so there was a fellow up there, he must have helped me, because your rope comes through at the level of the deck, and then the wall is up about 3 foot. And to get from the rope where I was hanging down to get over the top, somebody had to help me. You know. Anyway, I got in there, and I found a corpsman, and I said, I got a leg that has to be sewed up. You do it? He said, I can't sew a leg. I never did that. And I said, well, you saw it done, didn't you? Yeah. He says, he saw somebody do it. Well, I said, you can do it. And he did. He found some needles. I think they were dull, but and a thread. And I can remember that it was a small room when the officers slept in there. Could sit on this cot and put my leg up on the lavatory across the way. It was that tight, and he was sewing on it. But the needle went down through one side, all right. When it came to the other side, this made the skin push way up trying to get through, so it wasn't as sharp as it should be. But he sewed it up. And later I had trouble with it. First I didn't work, and then I went back to work, and I was setting up some of these pontoons. They were coming in on ship at that time, and there was a crane operator was taking a hold of it and swinging it over, and I was taking them off. And I was too high. That's 12 feet up. And he swung another one across, and it got between me and him. I couldn't see him, so I know I was going to get hit with it, so I just jumped off. Well, that took care of my leg. It just opened up again, and they couldn't sew it up after that. But eventually, after a little while, a gangrene set into it, and I had to go to the hospital, and they got it healed up. But then I worked on building these big Quonset huts, and on building different things there. We were 9 months at the Hebrides, Spirit of Santos. The Hebrides is named after the Hebrides, which is in south of Great Britain, some islands. But that's where we were for the first 9 months. Then we moved on up to the Sounds, and we built a big dock for a ship. And this thing, you build out of these pontoons, you link them up about 6 or 8 long, and then they would send them down. It's like you launch a ship down off the launching ramp. And then another group would take them and link pontoons together and fasten them together and make them about So they had about 40 feet wide, and then they were a floating dock, and then assembled up to the shore. I was kind of amused about that. All of us were working on, well, that was on the second island we were on, we built that. The guys had to put up some piling up there, so the ships coming in had somewhere to tie to. And they just drove them all down into the sea. Well, the first ship to come on was a Dutch ship, Amsterdam. And it wasn't from Amsterdam, I mean, they were using it in the Pacific, it was bringing materials. And when they came in and went slow down, they tied onto that, it moved a little bit and popped clear out of the water. It was in coral, that, like putting it in rock, and it didn't want to work. Anyway, we were only there about a month and a half or so. Then we moved on up to Bougainville, and we were there when the invasions, when the Marines went in to take the stretch to the jungles at Empress Augusta Bay. And I always unloaded the ship. That was part of my story there. As a kid, before I went in service, 3 of us, 2 brothers and myself, built a boat, 17 foot long, 7 foot wide, sailed down Lake Michigan. We sailed it a little bit one year, and the next year we decided to take a trip and went across the lake and out and out over the top and ran into storms, and so it was
pretty brave.
But that what I did, and when we went into service then and came overseas, I might say I spent about 90% of our time in war zones when I was in service. And when we were going across, it took us 30 days to get over there. And I met a chief who had been a fisherman, and he was in charge of all the landings. And after talking to him about it, whenever there's a landing, I worked on that, either in charge of a ship or handling the cargoes or something. That was all right most of the time, but anyway. After we got up to Bougainville, it was in the action, and we came ashore when it was almost dark. And we talked to the Marines because we were just on a jungle trail, and the Marines were there. We were up to the front lines, and they told us that they had orders that nothing moved at night, and that the Japs had snipers up in the trees, and so there's a chance you get shot. And they had orders that nobody would move at night. Well, our commander didn't do that. He had all that material all laying alongside in the jungle there, and he had armed guards walking back and forth. Well, one of them got shot. And it just says in the book there he got shot. And I think we understood that he said he was killed in action, but he wasn't. It was one of our own people that shot him. A guard shot him. Anyway, then we built airstrips, and we built a hospital, and something else on that island. Can't think what it was. Anyway, I worked on the airstrip, and we worked 12-hour days, and temperature was up to 120 degrees. I can still remember, always do. I had smoked a little bit before I went in service, but I quit. I didn't care for it. But we were working out there. Every so often they'd take a smoke break. And one of the times I was standing there talking to somebody, and the chief says, "You aren't smoking, go back to work." Well, the next day I had cigarettes. We could get them for free anyway. I was smoking.
You're pretending.
Yeah. But we built the strip, and then after it was built, a group of 12 of us served as a strip repair. So if anything happened to this strip, it would be repaired. We got commendations, ribbons for that. Some of us did, not all of us. The ones who stayed when they had a counterattack for the Japanese tried to retake the ship, or the strip. And so then we would, whenever a shell come, and it was strange, but there was 3 artillery pieces the Japanese had. There would always be 3 holes. or 3 and then 3 somewhere else.
Mhm.
And so we knew there was 3 of them. We could see them there. At that time, when they counterattacked, the Army was just taking over, and they come and told us, if you see where a dud is going in, let us know. We said, why? Well, we got a tripod we put over there, and we can tell where they're shooting from. We said, well, just come here and stay here with us. We can watch them. We can see the flash of their guns going off. There wasn't anybody around watching them. And we did this and kept the planes flying all the time. We had the experience that the pilots often would come back and land and then come over and see us and give us little bottles of whiskey. They were happy to be able to find a strip that they could land on. And we see a lot of accidents there because they came back from a ball and a lot of them were out of gas or were damaged and they couldn't land good. And so they crash landed. One actually landed sideways on there with the jungle trees up on the edge, 175 foot high. And then there wasn't, I don't think there was over 150 foot width there. And he managed to lay down, come crossways and landed and tipped up on his nose and walked out of that plane. The plane wasn't much good, but
No.
he got out alive. And so it was quite an experience. Then after when we had gone up to, well, this is on Bougainville. And after the action was over and the strip was done and we were about ready to, our work was done there. Then we hated it worse than working because we had to get out and march to keep us busy. They have us marching every day. And that didn't last too long, a few weeks, and we understood when it happened, our commander thought we were going to the Philippines because they were about time for them to land in the Philippines. And when we left there, we took our best equipment along and he loaded that up with us and we went down south a couple hundred miles, and we're about New Caledonia, which is probably about 500 miles south of there. And when we got there, they got the orders that we had to go back to the United States. We've been overseas 22 months. And that's when I came back in and got a 30-day leave. And when I came home, I told my girl, Marge, that I wanted an reason to come back next time. And so I wanted to get married. We come home on a Monday, got married on Friday. Now at that time you had to get blood tests and wait 2 weeks and all that stuff. But there was an exemption to us. We went up before a judge and then he just read a thing saying you're in the service and you have to get back and everything, is that right? And you tell him it was right, well then he issue a marriage certificate right away. And she was working for a doctor and he helped hurry it up to get blood tests. At that time you had to have a blood test before you could get married. And got those for us, and so we managed to get married on Friday. And then I told my mother, I think we were going up on a little honeymoon. Then it was gas rationing, but her dad worked on a farm and he gave us this thing, coupons that we can get gas with. And we were going to go, and Mother said, now, you've been gone a long time. And she says, at church Sunday we were having communion. And when in service we had that communion too, and we had things, but I thought she was right, and so we waited till Monday before we went on our trip to Lansing. It was a video. Yeah, that's as far as we went.
That isn't what they do now.
No.
I did get a little extension on that. It was over 30 days I was home,
Yeah.
but maybe another week or so. Then I went back, and my wife thought she'd come with us. And there was another couple, Harry and, I don't know his name.
Francis Yankee.
Yankees, yeah. And they came out with us, but they wanted to follow right away. We'd made arrangements to go back to where was it?
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. Because they go back to the nearest Navy base when their leave was over. And we were landed in California, and we thought it's much closer up here. And so then they were gonna come up with us, and we said, no, you can't do that, because we may not stay there at all. And we didn't, we stayed there a week or two, and then they shipped us back over across the country. And then we were in California, and so when we heard that they were coming out, we'd take whatever time we had off and go see if we can find a place for them to live. We went through Oakland, we went to San Francisco, we went all over, and everything was full. And remember, we went to San Jose then, which was quite a ways over the mountains. And when we got there, we went to different rooms, and I remember coming up to one big house that had rooms for rent. And she said, well, we're all full, but we got a big foyer here. It was probably 12-foot square. We could put some cots up here for you. That didn't set good. Then we ran into what do they call them at that time? Roadside cabins?
Cabins.
Yes, and they were built like a barn was. When you got in, there'd be a crack in the wall, you could see outdoors. There's just single boards on the outside. There was 2 rooms and a gas stove to cook on. And so we rented that. And when the girls come out there, they looked at it and they didn't think it was very good. They thought, well, we'll go find another place. And they spent about a week doing that. And they stayed right where, Marge anyway, stayed right where it was. Couldn't find a place.
No?
And she finally did some housework for them, or not housework.
I took care of the cabins and
Yeah.
stuff. I cleaned the cabins.
Cleaned them up after people had been there
The
overnight.
Navy guys would come in at night with a girl and sleep there.
Oh.
And it was up to me to keep them clean, get them clean for the next batch.
Great.
Anyway,
Oh, I saw a lot of different things.
I bet you did, got an education.
she stayed there with me until we had to go back, and she thought of staying, and I didn't think that was a good idea to stay on the West Coast. There was stories of people who stayed there and what happened to them. And so I talked to them, and she came back to Michigan. But then we went out the second time, and we went on a ship, and we got part way out toward the Hawaiian Islands, I guess, and the ship broke down. Well, they monkeyed with it took us several days, and finally we got to Hawaii. And then we stayed there just a short time. When we were there, we got, after being there a couple of days, a few of us to a time got a liberty to go onto shore. Now this is a big naval base there. And they had everything in that naval base. They had theaters in there, they had restaurants in there, everything you could have for nothing. But we got up near the gate, and we found out that we didn't need a pass. We had our identification with us, that's all we needed. So we said, well, let's go see something. We got on the bus, and we knew it was wrong to be in Honolulu without a uniform. That was the scuttlebutt on people. You had to be in dress uniform. Our dress uniforms were down in that ship in a hold, and we just had dungarees and stuff. Work, And so we took a bus and went in there and got to Ke Iki Beach and stayed right on the bus and come back, and it worked out fine. And then time we got back, there's a bunch more of us there. And some of the guys went up to a tavern and had a drink or two and come back. And then they wanted to go get a good restaurant. And we talked to a taxi driver, and they said, no, we just go from here into Honolulu and back, Pearl Harbor, Honolulu. Well, then one of the fellows come over, and I talked to this guy over here, and he says he'll take us to a good restaurant. So we all got in, a bunch of us, 7, 8 of us, and we went in there, and they come up the YMCA, and that big circular drive there, and we got on that, and we got, pardon me, we got there, and he said, we don't want to be here. We can't be in here. We we weren't supposed to. Well, that's easy enough. We just stay in the taxi and we go around the circle and we'll go back. And then a military officer come up to us and said, what's the problem? We said, well, he brought us here and we didn't know he was gonna come into the city. He said, that's all right, just get out and we'll take care of it. Okay, we got out. They come up with a big black Mariah there. They had us all get in there and took us down to the brig. So we spent a few hours in jail.
Uh-oh.
And they said, we'll take you back to the ship. But they waited till our leave was over, till it got dark. Then they brought us back. And so when we got back, why, they knew we were in Honolulu out of uniform. And we thought, well, we'll just tell officers when they questioned us that nobody told us that we couldn't be there. And the next day, one by one, we came in to our commanding officer, and he was busy writing something, and you had to sit down there, and he looked up and he said, in Honolulu, out of uniform, is that right? And you had to say yes or no. That was right. So he put us on extra duty. We were supposed to leave again, the ship was supposed to be fixed. And we were supposed to be, then take care of the ship and keep it clean. And the orders were that you had to get up and we had to clean that ship in the morning. And then at the middle of the day, we had to hose it all down. And then we had to clean it again. Well, as it turned out, we started out and we managed to hide and keep out of the way for the first time, and then the second time we were there and all the guys were up there and we got the hoses out and we started squirting everybody and got mad at us and they all disappeared, you know. And the ship broke down. And there we sat the rest of the day. And then went back into Honolulu and they got it started. We got off the ship. The trip was over. We didn't have any more penalty. But we stayed there about 2 weeks in Honolulu then. And got to see the whole town then because we got our double bags and we could go in there. But then when we finally did get out, we took off and went up to Saipan. And we got there and it just stayed there for a while because we were waiting for ships for an invasion. We didn't know where we were going.
So what year was this?
This was in 44.
44.
That's when no, this was in 45. 45.
How much 45?
Because when we stayed there a while, and then we were told that we were going up for an invasion. And they didn't tell us where it was till after we got going. And they said, we can't get enough LSTs for the whole outfit.
What's that?
And so we want volunteers. An LST is a landing ship.
Oh, okay.
Tanks, landing ship tank. That's the big one. And so we want volunteers to go on the first 2 ships that we could get. And when they came around, they asked for volunteers. I said, no, I'm married, no, I'm not going to volunteer for anything. And about a half hour later, they come back. Or no, it was the next morning. It was posted up on the bulletin board, and my name was right on the top. I said, how come I didn't make any volunteers? Well, Ham volunteered. This was the fellow that I had met the first time going over and was always on landing duty on the landing. And he was still there with us and he put me on there, so I ran a ship when we got over there. And we got going and he told us this was Okinawa, which was, we didn't know where that was. It was halfway between what is that island? Off Japan there, off China, Taiwan, I think so, and Japan. And there you're going, it's closer than anybody had ever been before. And that's when we were we got up to the island, we were waiting to get ashore, that's when we heard that President Roosevelt died.
Mm.
So this same time, 4th of April or something like that. But we got in, and it was quite a chore coming in because they knew nothing about the island. And a couple of minesweepers went in ahead of us. And these guys were in, and it struck us because there was guys up in the front there, and you could hear them marking. Mark 1, Mark 2, or whatever they say. And it reminded me of Mark Twain and he was called that because that's what they did on the Mississippi River, was somebody had to be up in front to see how deep it was. And they were checking all the way in through them, see where we could go to get up to shore. And but we got in, we got landed. But that was a day or two later then, they told us that we got to move around to another location, which happened to be Buckner Bay. There was a long peninsula went out there, and I being on this landing cruise, we had big pontoon rafts with a Chrysler Marine motor on the back of them that they'd sent from, came up from Honolulu. Anyway, we got on those, and we're told to take them up around this point. Well, I've got a map downstairs on a thing that when we were on the ship there, I copied this little one of what Okinawa was like. And they didn't give us any maps, didn't have anything. But that was somebody who had come before, been on this ship before us, another group, and left that, and then I copied it. And so we started heading, which was about south, going around a big peninsula. And the first thing, obstacle we come in, there was a reef. And there was three of us pontoon boats there. And we got together, and the chief asked us, what do you think? We should go inside there where it's calmer water, or should we go outside? Oh, we said, we don't know what's inside, if that is going to get up so close that we have to get up right up by the island. And at that time then, we saw our planes coming over the top of the mountain, and it was just in the middle there, and dropping bombs, so we knew the Japanese were there, and we didn't think we want, so we decided to go on the outside. We went on the outside. And as more action come on, a lot of action around, and the Navy started shelling the shore, and we pulled further out, and got out there a ways, and the destroyer come up close to us, and he talked with one of these big megaphones. And well, I won't repeat just what he said, but it was swear words of it. What are we doing out there in the fleet? We said, we didn't want to be close up to shore. Well, you can't be here in the fleet. So we had to pull up closer to shore and went around. But then we got out to the point, and there was an old lighthouse there. It was damaged on the end, and I remember that there. We stopped and got together again. And the chief said, I think there's points up ahead there that I can see that we'll have to go around. And I had this little map, and I said, I think those are islands, and I don't think we own those. And so we turned in and stayed close to the shore. He listened to me, and that's the way we had to go. And we got going, and it got dark, and I remember some of these smaller boats, they had their destroyers and destroyer escorts and stuff. And some of these guys started turning spotlights on us. And we'd heard that there was kamikaze boats too, that they just run into the ship, and it scares you. And we were afraid that one of them might want to, that's what they thought with us, if we might be one of the Japanese. But and then we went for quite a ways, quite a time, I think a couple hours, and we kept hitting reefs and coral heads. And I was up in the front trying to watch things, and the other guy on the other end was directing it. And you'd had to back up each time and go make another jar, and it hit another one, hit another one. And we went in for, like I said, a couple hours, and all of a sudden there was a big black wall up in front of me. And what was it but a big pontoons that they had shipped out. It was a huge pontoon with all pontoons stacked on it, about 24 feet high. And it turned out that's what we were supposed to haul to shore. So we stayed there overnight, and then we pulled it in. We didn't do too good a job with it because we were towing that thing in, and there's a Buckner Bay is a big bay, and then there's a small inner bay that we're supposed to get to. And like I say, we kept on hitting those coral heads. And finally we hit on one, and we couldn't get off. And I didn't know it then, but we found out later that it was high tide. It was the full moon, is when the tide is highest, and you couldn't get it back off. Well, we spent the next week or two shuttling back and forth to shore and taking these pontoons on there and by hand shoving them off in there and then towing them into shore. But that was part of the job. Then later I didn't do much building while I was there. I got on with a bunch that was working in the dumps, unloading ships and putting them up there. I remember we worked there at night. That bothered me somewhat because I was in charge. Every time the chief left, I was in charge. And the guys were talking about finding alcohol and where would you find alcohol, and they were going around. It only took a few of us to unload things, and sometimes you waited in between, and they were trying to steal stuff. And that's what happens in service. And I knew that if I wanted to turn these guys in or get too angry with them, that they're going to get angry at me and I'm not going to be friends anymore. And so I just kind of kept quiet and stayed back. I know from those dumps that some things like Coleman lanterns never went out there. Somebody that was working in the place got it, and they had them in their tents because we had no electric lights or anything. But that we did for a while. Then we had to go out and unload a ship. And when we were out unloading this ship, we worked one day on it and loaded right in front of the superstructure and got the first layer off that one. And then it was night, so we decided to set up some cots, which was underneath the edge, because your top of your hatch is quite a bit smaller than what the ship is. And so we just got under the edge and we slept there in the night. At 5:20 in the morning, I woke up to hear a big roar of a plane diving, motors wide open, and looked up, and all of a sudden you got a tremendous light blast and noise up there. He hit right above our heads on top of the ship. Kamikaze is. We found out later, at least they told us, that he had set down the night before, but they identified him as being one of our own float planes. And he stayed there till daylight, and then he took off and hit us. And it was kind of nerve-wracking because the first thing I did with that overhang there, they have a ladder going up. It's just two steel things with steel bars. I went up that thing and got up to the top. Here was that wing of the plane was laying up in front, and I couldn't get out. It just blocked the thing. But then we found another way to get out, and got up. I remember there, I seen some of our men. I guess they were our men. I'm not sure, because wasn't a very big crew on the ship, and a lot of the armed guard was the ones that got killed. But there was a body there. It was a Jap that had taken us down, and they were discreet. They were doing everything. They were spitting and kicking them, and even urinating on them. And I told my buddy, "Come on, this is no good." I thought that's a human being. And we picked him up and we threw him over the side. But then it went around to one side of the ship, and everything didn't look damaged or anything.
No fire?
But
No
I got
fire?
to the back, and the smoke was just billowing out of there. And so I got some of the other fellows with me. I don't know how many of this there were. But we went on in and found there. And what had happened where the guys slept in there, they had bunks three high, and they're made out of mesh. They're like a wire mesh with their mattress go on top of that. They had collapsed down, and there was bodies in there, and this wire mesh was tangled in them, and it was a mess. But I remember they had what do you call them, the stretchers there. And we got a stretcher out there, and we got one of them out, and we put them on that stretcher, and we didn't know anything about handling people or anything. And the ship has only got about 2.5 foot wide always, and everything. We tried to take him out, and the first thing, he's sliding off that thing, you know. We had to put him down and tie the straps around to hold him on. We got him out. Altogether, I think we got about 12 fellas that we took out of there. And there was over 2 or 3 of them that lived. But we didn't know that. We didn't know anything about it. The last one we got, we went up above, and there was an officer. He wasn't dead. We knew it. He was screaming. And his leg, well, we looked at his leg first, and we took a knife and cut his pants loose, and couldn't see nothing wrong with his leg. And I don't know if it was then or later that we looked at him, looked at his back, and he had just spots in his back that he got it. So it wasn't his leg after all. But we had no stretchers anymore, and he was on, the mattresses were about 2 inches thick, and so he was on that mattress, and we just kind of doubled it up, and we took it out, and we had to go down one of these stairways, and they're real steep, and only a couple feet wide, one guy ahead and one behind. We just slid him down that stairway. He was screaming all the way, and it took him out too. But that was quite an experience to go through. I found the watch, that's why I knew it was 520 that he hit, because it still said that, but I had nothing there, no way to keep it. I wrapped it in some paper, toilet paper I think, and stuck it in the bag, and after a while I looked at it again and the hands had come off, so it didn't mean nothing to me when the time wasn't on there. I just threw it away.
Whose watch was it?
It was a Japanese
The
pilot's.
kamikaze pilot.
It was made in Germany.
Mm.
Yeah, it was his. So that was quite an experience. But the war ended, and I was real fortunate. I don't know yet how they determined that, but there was you had to have so many points to go back to the United States. And you got some for being married, which I was, and for my age, and that I think because I had an exemption first, that counted, and there's so many. So I was one of the first ones, and I think there was only a couple of us from our whole battalion that went out on the first trip. We went out and come back on a cruiser. There was a cruiser coming back to the United States, and go back on that. That surprised me too, because I had started out with a fireman second class, which was quite low, where a lot of them had a lot of ratings, because being the Seabees, they, as according to experience they had in working, and some of them come in with first class rates, and some second, third, and I had very little experience that way. I had taken up drafting in school, and so when I worked there, we worked at the end, we were working there when I left, and I was in charge of finding the stuff out of the dump. They had a blueprint, and I was the only one that could read a blueprint. These other guys all been in the building, but they couldn't read a blueprint. And you had to find out what went in someplace. We were building a parachute loft, and there was a high building on there. But that's why I got that job. And I got talked into, well, I couldn't find one part I need. And the guy says, don't look for it. We'll get the day off. And sure enough, the chief was there, and he says, well, you might as well go back camp until we find it. But he said, Volkers, you stay here and find it. So everybody else got the day off, and I kept on working. And found it.
That backfired a little bit.
Hmm?
That backfired a little bit.
Yeah, well, you often have that. Things don't go just so.
No.
But through the whole experience, the Lord was with us. there was times when I could have died when they were shelling us. It shelled us on that airstrip at one time, and generally they shelled and then must have pulled their guns back in the caves because they didn't shell again while we were out there. But the one time we were there, and there was a guy from some newspaper, standing up in a Jeep taking pictures of us trying to repair that hole, and here they come again. When the shells come down, you could hear 'em for about a second before they hit the ground. And so we knew we had to get out of there. We're out in the middle of the strip, and everything is out in the clear. I could spot way down, there'd be a machine gun nest. And the sides, there was a jungle. Most of them run to the jungle. I headed down that way, and then all this ground here was volcanic ash. That's from that volcano that you see in the picture. And you'd run, and when you hear that thing going, you just spread out and dove for the ground. And of course, we had no shirts on. The rules said you had to keep your shirt on, but nobody, you can see in the pictures, nobody has a shirt on. And we got down there, and I thought it was just like a dream, because you run, you weren't getting anywhere. And you dive, and you get up again and run again. But they stopped shelling then, and we come back. And here the rest of the guys were up there, they'd gone toward the jungle. And which wouldn't have helped anyway if a shell had hit near you, there's no protection. But they were laughing. And we had a chief, that Pagoda, I think his name was. We called him Pudge. He's a pretty heavy guy. And he had gone there, and they ran quite a ways too. And he had a 12-pound sledge, and he carried it all the way. I mean, this is what you do when you're panicking that way. Your mind can only think of one thing, get your safety, and you don't think of even release and drop it. And we got a big kick out of that. He'd carried it all the way in there. But then I came home and got discharged. I'd been in for 3 years and 1 month when I got discharged. Got discharged from Chicago. They shipped us up to the Naval Base in Chicago there. And I called her and asked her to come out there, and she met me in Chicago, and we stayed there a day or two, I guess, before we come home. But that was the end of my military career.
Were there many casualties in your unit?
We had very few. The one I talked about, who was shot by one of our own people, and we had, as I can recall, one of them was killed with a truck backed over him, and 2 of them, and I saw both of those cases, were killed by falling trees. We had to make a 2-mile strip that we had to clean out and get all the jungle out of the way. And they just sent crews out to work off the end of the strip. And the first day wasn't too bad. You just cut what you could, and dozers and stuff shoved some stuff out. But when we made that strip, they were busy on getting the strip repaired. And we did it by hand. And some of those trees would be 5 foot in diameter, and we only had a 6-foot saw. You get in the center and you walk around that, and we had 8, 10 fellas, and we just took 2 of them to a time in a few minutes, and you were too hot. Another one took over. But I remember we had one nasty experience there, and it wasn't us working, them fellas were working near us. Because they had, I forget the tree, that kept dropping roots, and it'll get a thick wedge of jungle. This was about 25 foot in diameter.
They're banyan trees.
I guess banyan trees, yeah. And they made some tunnels into it, and they put dynamite in there, and they set it off, and then it didn't come down. And they waited and waited and waited, and finally they said, "We better go in." The chief said, "You better go in and set some more charges." They walked up to it, and they were just about to it, and they heard a crack, and it went over. If they'd gone in, they would've been dead,
Mhm.
cause all these brooks around, you know. But we had one fella that I saw, I wasn't there when he got hit. But when you would fall these trees, they had all vines in them. Some of them as big as your wrist. And they would tie from one tree to another. And so a lot of times they made a lot of estimates on that, which way it was gonna fall. And it was a regular tree, they'd make a big, huge notch in it and come through. And it would start to come down, and it would turn and twist, and it'd come down in a different direction. And this one time when they cut the trees, everybody ran and would get behind another tree. And this one fella got behind a tree with a tree come down toward him and knocked a huge branch off there, and it kind of hit him on the back. I went over and saw him then, and he was still living then, but he died before they get him in. And another time, we come on out, it was all in this clearing jungle. And we stopped the truck and we were going on out there, and one of the fellows come running toward us. He's back, get back. And the tree was coming down, and the tree come down and hit him. And it hit him on the back, and there was a stump where somebody cut a tree off there, and his head hit that, and it hit him. Yeah, it's hard to know, but that's what war is all about too. That's where we had, I think we lost 4 men, and it was really all done by enemy action. With all the shelling we got and everything, and all the holes and everything, they didn't get hurt.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
I got a citation.
How did you get them?
That was from working on this airstrip, keeping it in repair, and there was no time that it was down over a half hour. Although he flashed them so the planes coming back could land. There was one time there doing that, that was the only time that I can recall that I disobeyed an order. We all did. We had gone, it was getting dark, and we'd worked on it was a bomber strip, ours, our main one, and there was a fighter strip was right near it. We went over there, and there was a shell it hit in what they call a warm-up area. Is much bigger than there, so all the planes assembled there when they going to take off. And we loaded that thing, and it was getting dark, and that was the only time our commander had come down in the Jeep and come down to see us. And he asked what we're doing. We told him they had a strip there, but they said we weren't gonna. We talked to the fellows in the tower, and they said it's not in the way, it ain't gonna hurt us any. And the commander said, you can see on the picture of that truck, there's a big light we had on top there.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, we never used it. It was getting dark, and he says, turn on that light and fix it. And he took off. We threw dirt in the hole, we took off. Didn't.
Never turned the light on.
We didn't turn the light on. We thought we turned that light on and they're gonna start shooting at us. We did not do it. We came back the next morning and we fixed it. But, and we all knew it. We were not gonna fix that. They said it wasn't gonna be in their way anyway. But that's my story.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
How
How did you stay in touch with your family?
by letter, an email. There was those emails that you could write a little thing out and it did go through an inspector of some kind, and he would mark through on most of it that you wanted really to see.
They cut a lot of your letters out.
Yeah. So
Really?
it's hard to get a message through to them.
I would
That's the only way. There was no telephones or radios that we could use or anything like that.
Picture's bigger
Just
than the rest of them.
go in the mail. And that email, I guess they must have sent that by telegraph or something back, and then
I
was
got
copied
letters
and sent
all
out to
cut
them.
up.
How often could you
He
write?
couldn't tell us.
Like anytime you wanted?
Where did he
Anytime
go?
you wanted to, yeah. I didn't.
I would get,
She'd write me quite often,
I wrote every day,
yeah.
every day
And
for
I'd
almost
probably
3 years.
once a week or something. 'cause
And
you
I
were
would
tired
get
and-
letters,
and
maybe
busy.
5 to a time.
What was the food
Or
like?
something like that.
Ours was
But I wrote
wonderful.
him every day.
Everybody complained about it. But we, in
I don't know
the
when that one
Seabees,
goes.
had our own cooks, and they got raw materials, and they cooked them up. And when we had, especially in the morning when they made rolls, sweet rolls, the Marines were running these strips, and they had all the repairmen and everybody. They all come over to our place and have breakfast, and we were having sweet rolls. But we had
To this
good
day, you
food.
won't eat Spanish.
The fellas complained about the food, they all complained about it, but everybody gained weight. When I was in service, I weighed 185 pounds, that's the most I've ever weighed. Now I'm close to 150. And you
You were
weren't
working
fat,
hard though too, right? Mostly
Yes.
muscle.
it was muscles you had.
What were some pranks that you or others would pull? Do you remember any?
No, there's things that happened, I don't say necessarily pranks, the guys made liquor, which you weren't supposed to do. We were given 2 bottles of beer on a Saturday, but that's all. But they made, and I talked to one of them, he was from Grand Rapids here, in fact, I got a picture of him somewhere. But he said, I said, how do you make the stuff out of it? He said, we made it out of flour. I said, where'd you get the flour? He said, well, that's easy enough. We went up to the Army Depot there. And he says, any of these guys, you can bribe them, you give them some money, and they go in and get a truckload of flour. And then you put yeast with it and cause it to ferment. And then they set up a still, and they made alcohol. Now, he told me then that he was caught once, and they'd done those. I don't know if you ever see them, if there was a picture in here, but the Japanese had tombs. There was a big oval-shaped thing that was laid of concrete out with a little wall around it, and had a small doorway. And when a person died, they put him in a urn and put him in there. When the bones dried up, they took him and put him in a smaller urn, so they kept him in. But they used one of those for a still and set it up in there. And like I say, they could bribe these guys and get it. Well, he went one day and got 2 gallons of it. And he was walking away from there, and a shore patrol come down the road. They apparently spotted that they had the thing there and knew it was there. And he said, I just took the 2 and smashed them together. And that was the end. And they had him up before I don't know what they called it,
Sort of hearing, court.
a court hearing, yeah. And they couldn't prove anything. They didn't have it. They couldn't prove what it was. So he said, I got off. But that's what they do. I actually tasted some, but not that, because was alcohol. Some of them were just brewing up a mixture of things, and I don't know what they used. It looked like a bunch of sour milk, and it stunk. And I took a sip of that stuff, and I would have no one touch it again. But the guys did get drunk. We had that on the one island, and a couple things happened there. I remember the guys they worked at a torpedo place then, but the torpedoes were run with wood alcohol, not with alcohol that you could drink. But they had a rumor, they said if you take a loaf of bread and strain it through that, it'll take the alcohol, the poison out of it. But fellas got drunk and they weren't any good. I remember one day we had that's when we had our tents lined up there, and the guy come up the street. He was drunk and he was mad at somebody. And some of his buddies come up to him and said, come on, you can't do that. And they talked him into going back. And in order to keep him there, they talked him into taking his clothes off and going to bed, and they hid his clothes. Well, a little while later, we see him coming up there, bare naked, with his rifle.
Uh-oh.
And he come up the street. Well, then somebody called the shore patrol, and they went and got him. And they took him down and put him, we had a brig there, and they made the brig the walls of it out of reinforcing mesh. Still use it sometimes, about 6-inch squares, and it's like a big fence pieces, but it's heavy metal. And we went down after he'd been in there a while to see what was happening, and he was standing by the door kicking that mesh, and the blood was just running out of his feet. It was just bleeding, but he was kicking it to try to open the door. They're crazy. And I remember that time, they sent about half a dozen of them back to the United States. And they call them malingeries or something like that, sent them back. And then when we came back to the same base where they'd been sent to, we found out that these guys were running, one was running the rifle range and one was running something else. They just had good jobs.
Yeah.
But
What did you think of officers or fellow soldiers?
we were Navy men, and we thought we were all good buddies, and the officers, we were doing all right. We didn't think our commander was the right person, a lot of us didn't. He was of German descent. His name was Lipton von Clark Dyker. And he hated colored people. They had colored that were officers, took care of their mess and took care of their clothes and everything like that. That was the only colored that we had. And there was, remember there were some colored battalions there. But after we had gone out on our first tour, then our commander was given a different command of several battalions. And he was in Okinawa with us. And we heard then that he got into some trouble. And they took one of the battalions away from him and put a colored battalion with him. He committed suicide. That was more than he could stand to have a colored battalion over.
Wow.
But this is the kind of person he was. And a lot of this, my understanding, a lot of the Southerners were that way. They would, if they got to deal with these people, they couldn't do it.
It's a shame.
After returning from the service, like the days and the weeks following, what did you do after that?
When I come home from service, before I went in, I worked at General Motors. I was a crane hooker and got supplies and sent them on out to the factory, just around. And I come home and they were on strike. And I was never happier. I didn't like General Motors anyway. I didn't like in the factory, working in that factory. And so when I went and I applied for unemployment, and then a day or so later I had a brother-in-law who had not gone into service because he was married and he had children. And he wanted to build a house. And he said, "Do you help me?" Yeah. And so I knew enough about it to rough it in, and then we had a fellow from Burton Heights Church that we went to then that was in the building, and we knew him. Got him to do the finishing, and then I helped him finish it. And from then on, I did the finishing, did the work myself, and picked it up. Of course, when you were in the service, we didn't make regular construction, but we learned to build things and put things up anyway. And so I got into building trade and was there ever since.
Did you make any close friendships while in the service?
Yeah, I had one fellow that I knew when I first went in. We used to go skating down on Division Avenue, almost downtown, in the roller rink. And when we first went in service, he went in with me. And I didn't know him too well, but I'd met him down there. And he's been a friend ever since.
We are still friends.
Yeah, they're
For always 16
in Florida
years.
right now, but they are all winter, but yeah. And you have your friends. There are some people that you like better than others.
Yeah.
And some not very good. I had an experience with one of them. I talked about some people drinking, and well, this one did. And we slept 4 in the tent. And I'd worked all day, but some of the guys like to gamble. They like to play cards, and so they were in our tent playing. And after a couple hours, and they were getting kind of rambunctious and noisy and stuff, you know, and I said, I've got to work tomorrow. I said, can you keep a little quiet? And all the fellows left except the guy that was in our tent. And he was mad. He threatened to kill me.
Mm.
And they said, I heard later the guys told me that he had been losing money, he'd been drinking, and he'd been losing money, and they knew how he was betting, and so when he'd get some good cards, they could figure out he had good cards, and they would all drop out. And he was angry, and then when all the guys left, he couldn't get his money back.
Right, game was over.
That was the end of it for him. He was one of the ones that they sent back to the United States. So. But when you lay in there and somebody's threatening them and could kill you, you don't sleep very well. In fact, I don't know if I did much sleeping that night anyway.
Did you join a veterans organization?
No. No. I got involved with the church. Well, first with our Millbrook school. And when our oldest son, Ron, started going to school, the women started taking them there. And there was quite a number of them. The Rixies
Don't go
oh,
through.
a bunch. Anyway, pretty soon the women said, that's awful hard on the cars. And we got together, there were a bunch of us, and said, well, maybe we get a bus. So one of them found a bus up north. It might have been Randy Cooper, I don't know. Anyway, we bought a bus. And then the doctor we had, and he had gone to Burton Heights Church, so I knew him. He came to one of our meetings when we were getting together and so about this bus and stuff, and he said, don't start a bus society. Godwin did that, and it's been going on for years, and it took them a long time before they got it built. He said, start a school. So, thinking about it, and we looked around for property, and Bill Duttler was one of them there, and he was a realtor. And we found this piece of property, and I remember going with some of the guys and looking at property at 32nd and Kalamazoo, and where Brookside Church is too. And where Brookside Church was a pasture and was all wet and all water. And I thought, that's no place to put a church. And then we looked where the Church of the Nazarene is. A doctor who went to Burton Heights Church, owned that. He refused to sell it. He wouldn't sell it. And then we discovered this piece of property up there, that 20 acres there, and the fellow had a little house on there, and we bought it from him, and he moved that house himself off to the corner, and we told him as long as he wanted to live there, he could live there. Well, it wasn't many years, but some people have asked us, how come they didn't put this school up there at the street instead of these houses? Bill said, we can sell those lots. And Paul Van Kooten, he laid it out there and sold the lots, and we got some money from that. We planted some trees out of the south end. I think some of them are still growing out there. So we could sell them for Christmas trees, and these women worked hard at that to raise money.
Mother's Club.
Oh, yeah.
They would make dinners and make weddings and take care of things and raise money so we could start the school.
Boy, did we,
How did your service and experiences affect your life?
It carried on. It brought me into the construction trade, and it taught me that when you need work, you go work. You don't complain about it, you just work. That's what I did.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered in this interview?
No, I've talked about most of the things that happened.
You did a good job.
Yeah, thank you very much for being so willing and open
Okay.
and sharing. I appreciate it.
I hope that somebody will enjoy that.